Philosophic Research Society, and I'm somewhat out of practice. I haven't lectured 5 years to the day. I resigned a very lucrative position for ethical reasons 5 years ago in Canada, and so this is quite an unlimbering of dusty things for me. I'm very glad to be here, though. I think that the aims of the Philosophic Research Society are commensurate with the highest ideals of civilization at any time and anywhere. I would like to begin with a collection of attention, my own as well as yours, by reading a poem which is apropos of the tone of what I would like to present before all of us today. I'm not one of these lecturers who knows exactly what wants you to know. I'm one of these family-type diners. I put a huge bowl of nourishment out in the center someplace, and we all try to partake of that. Yeah, that's the style that I was trained in by a Chinese master in San Francisco who refused to let me be a normal American graduate student. And so this is the way that I've always learned how to do things. This poem is entitled The Snowman. And the author is quite an interesting figure, incidentally. His name was Wallace Stevens. And he was an executive for the Hartford Accident and Indemnity Insurance Company. In fact, he was, for many years, one of the top executives there in Hartford, Connecticut. And typical of the Tao of journeying, he used to write his poems in his mind on his way to work in the morning, commuting. And when he would get into his office, the first thing that he would do was have his executive secretary take him home for the day. And Stevens' poetry is quite interesting because it is a poetry of the mind, almost exclusively rather than of the page. And two of his very great friends, E.E. Cummings and William Carlos Williams, were poets of the page. You have to lift their poems off the page almost with your eyes in order to see what they're doing. Stevens hovers in our attention someplace in between our ears and our inner ears. And this is a poem that he did when he was a fairly young man. I like it very much, and I think it's a good beginning for us today. It's entitled simply The Snowman. One must have a mind of winter to regard the frost in the boughs of the pine trees crusted with snow, and have been cold a long time to behold the junipers shagged with ice, the spruces rough in the distant glitter of the January sun, and not to think of any misery in the sound of the wind, in the sound of a few leaves, which is the sound of the land full of the same wind that is blowing in the same bare places. For the listener who listens in the snow, and nothing himself beholds nothing that is not there, and the nothing that is. Let me try once more. Just a second. Good poem has to be written twice. The Snowman by Wallace Stevens. One must have a mind of winter to regard the frost and the boughs of the pine trees crusted with snow, and have been cold a long time to behold the junipers shagged with ice, the spruces rough in the distant glitter of the January sun, and not to think of any misery in the sound of the wind, in the sound of a few leaves, which is the sound of the land, full of the same wind that is blowing in the same bare place. For the listener who listens in the snow, and nothing himself beholds nothing that is not there, and nothing that is. This is pure American Zen, if you wish, Taoism. It's a very peculiar thing that this land of ours, with its hodgepodge of traditions and sort of scarecrow structure of wisdom teachings, the shattered early primordial wisdom that was here with the American Indians, our technological deluge, and our economic grandeur that produces that greedy neurosis called business. It's strange that this country would have produced already, in just a few hundred years, some of the finest and most refined minds and sensibilities that the world has seen. And we are extremely fortunate to have these kindred spirits and souls accessible to us in the language that we speak every day, and in the kind of consciousness that we carry to the supermarket, to work, to home, every day. And it's this accessibility of the great tradition of wisdom that belongs to the everyday here in this country that I think eventually will set us apart. This grand tradition of wisdom used to be the private purview of the elite, whether set aside by tradition or by circumstance or by design, most likely, by the sort of conquest or the obfuscation of very, very, very secret doctrine. For us, it's an open fair. And all we have to do is make the choice to simply investigate and carry with us in our daily living little hints and clues, which eventually for us can elicit the very finest response. The quality of presence of being that, when directed to things as they are, yield a fullness of vision, the nothing that is not there and the nothing that is. This is a very, very peculiar situation. And in direct contrast to this, in parallel of sorts, but in a contrast, our immediate tradition here in the West begins with Homer. And most likely our only introduction to Homer ever is the Odyssey, the Iliad being one of those perfectly balanced, huge murals, geometric in form and focused on one incident in the center, and everything just balanced precariously on one insight, the insight of the nature of wrath. The Iliad is a little inaccessible to us. It's rather like one of those. The reading of the Iliad is like the launching of a great mysterious gray battleship in the fog. It's so large and so cumbersome that one is never quite sure what it is. But the Odyssey, accessible to us. Its light skipping rhythms, its charming sequencing of fantastic images and homing images finally brings back to us a sense that we, after all, after 3,000 years, very close to this beautiful blind sage. Or Homer was reputed to have written in a hymn to Apollo that if any beautiful lady happens to ask you who's the best writer of all time, tell her it was a blind old man in rocky Chios, his song. And that was about 3,000 years ago. But in the Odyssey, a very peculiar set of circumstances, we're given a hero who has had great success in war, who has wandered around the world, has had great success and excess, and has been offered what we would think the magna cum laude degree of humanity. He's been offered immortality. He may live forever, and not simply as that Sybil who, living would decay with age and finally just be terrified by immortality. No, Odysseus was offered this wonderful immortality to live with the goddess for all time. He turned it down. He said, no, I'm going forward. She couldn't understand. And I suppose most people at most times would fail to understand the point. Is it not some kind of ultimately secure paradise that we seek after all? Is that not the objective and the goal? Are we not looking for a heaven or a nirvana or some situation where we are forever then protected? Why turn it down if it's offered to you? Odysseus does. We and our kind of way of living, very simpatico with that. You see, he has an ally. He has the open eye of wisdom. He has the friendship with Athena. And he knows that the completeness of life is the important thing for him. And in the Odyssey, his commitment is always never just for himself, but to finally return home. It is his homecoming. And the vision of this homecoming for him is like a quality of presence of mind, like in the poem The Snowman by Wallace Stevens. It gives him the capacity that any kind of a daily gestalt, a melee of images, or a satisfaction of desires, or perhaps a sense of outgoing adventure, whatever the situation, whatever the events, he has within himself that piercing perception, presence of mind, presence itself, if you use that kind of phrase, to see through to his homecoming, which is not forbade him, as the rest of his companions, as we must know, all perished. He alone made it home. Athena, then, is worth our looking at. And it seems at first glance that Athena would be as far from Lao Tzu and Taoism, as far from the I Ching as one could imagine. And this is so, and that is why they are so close. Because we're not dealing with a scale of values that the ends become more and more disparate. We're dealing rather with a fullness of being, a fullness of the perception of being, where the ends curve round and resonate together. And we find kinship with people at the farthest ends of the earth and at the farthest ends of time. Because we are similar. And ultimately, in a very, very pleasantly mysterious way, with them, we are interchangeable. Athena, I guess I should outline this for you a little bit. Athena was not simply left to the province of a book, the Odyssey or the Iliad. She was not simply left in some volume of mythology. Athena was taken into the daily life of the Greeks of Attica in the most profound sense, on the highest point in their terrain, on the Acropolis, where time-honored for thousands of years, structures of religious sacrifice have been built. They built for her, in the age of Pericles, the finest building ever built anywhere. The building is called Parthenon. And it was at the time it was built, and still today, an absolute miracle in the perception of architectural form and significance. And throughout all the ages, the Parthenon survived to the wonderment of all cultures and civilizations until it was used as an ammunition dump and some foolish military excursionists, and a few centuries ago, demolished most of the building by sending a rocket into this ammunition dump. But when it was built, the Parthenon, in its structure, contained two rooms. One small room for the kind of treasure which the businessman would recognize, the coffer with the money and so forth. The other contained treasure that everyone in the city came to recognize. And it was the sacred space where this enormous statue of Athena, about 40 feet tall, about a 4-story building, wooden but covered with glittering ivories, and every year this statue of Athena would be cloaked by what was called the piplos, which was a huge cape. And it would be carried in this grand procession by the people of the city of Athens every year up to the Acropolis, into the Parthenon with great ceremony, and drape it around the goddess. And what was on that wonderful cloak of Athena? Embroidered for all the mythic images that were significant to the imagination and minds of Greek people. And they were almost all derived from Homer, the genius of the perception of Homer. And to make sure that no one would ever forget how it was done, they simply carved on friezes around the Parthenon the events that would take place every year. And so we know exactly what they did because we still have those friezes. And we know exactly the dimensions of the building because even from the ruins, we can compute the design of the whole. This kind of sense of completion, entering into the everyday lives of its people, is the only process that ever ultimately retains its significance for human beings. This is the only thing that ultimately matters. And we find parallels with this. The odd thing is that our problem today is a problem not of having mythic images to embroider on the cloak, or even a place in which to carry them, that we don't understand too well any longer how to bring these things together. It's the integration of them that has become a problem for us. Partly because we have an insistence on form, on the things which are. And we forget that every form that is accessible to us is accessible by virtue of the formlessness, which allows that form to penetrate through to our perception. In other words, we're saturated with the yang of things and almost unknowing of the yin of things. We're almost unable to allow that, in the popular phrase, that which is not, that the nothing, the emptiness of the cup, as to the utility of it. This is the problem. And this is where the Tao of journey becomes fine art for us and a possibility. Because we have in our sensibility the capacities read to you in this Wallace Stevens poem and in other things which I will present today. We have that capacity to see both the yin and the yang, the form and the formlessness together. Let's try another poem by Stevens to try and focus this a little bit. This is a poem which I think focuses very, very nicely the tone of what I've been saying for about 15 minutes here. It's simply entitled The American Sublime. How does one stand to behold the sublime, to confront the mockers, the Mickey mockers and plated pears? When General Jackson posed for his statue, he knew how one feels. Shall a man go barefoot, blinking and blind? But how does one feel? One grows used to the weather, the landscape and that. And the sublime comes down to the spirit itself. The spirit and space. The empty spirit in vacant space. What wine is one? What bread is one? This is an insurance imposing this on computer training. These thoughts are easily accessible to us, except that normally they occur to us in such fleeting instants that when we are young and naive, we write them off or dismiss them as just little blinks of insight. And later, when we come into the fullness of our power of perception and mind and so forth, we try to make intellectual quandaries out of them, and we end up tying big plates of spaghetti noodles, and nothing comes out. The baby's crying, we've got to go to work, and we're distracted, and everything's left. And then finally, some event comes along like this, and we get a chance to hold it in front of us for a little longer than a second, and for sure there it is. It is accessible. It is easy to see. It's easy to feel. It's our own. And this is part of the Tao theory. This is part of the contemporary way of life that we find ourselves akin to. And with the ancient Greeks, with Homer, with Odysseus, who is the man of many minds, he has an infinite variety of ways of looking at the world and at things and at people. And when he comes in contact with people, he tries to know their mind, their style of thinking, their style of presentation. And all the way through the great voyages in the Odyssey, experiences with Polyphemus, experiences with Circe or Calypso, Scylla and Charybdis, throughout all these great episodes, Odysseus is learning a variety of ways in which he can deal with what we would call fantastic reality. But the real test for him is when he comes home. And when he presents himself, he comes not as the triumphant warrior, but as a beggar in disguise. He knows that the appearance which he carries forth is going to identify him. It's going to be the form by which he's responded to. And Odysseus is enough in control of the total perception of himself that he can wear disguise almost, in the phrase today, for real. When he first lands again on Ithaca, and he talks to the shepherd Eumaeus to find out the first information about the state of his homeland. He gives a fantastic story that he's actually the son of a rich Cretan merchant, and he's been chased out of Crete and whatever. And later on, he goes through another spiel to Penelope, his wife, in disguise. He tells her a similar story. He does not lose track of himself. He does not lose track of the importance of keeping his power of penetration and vision, the sense, let's use the Sanskrit word here, prajna, the sense of wisdom which cuts through, which pierces through. But it creates a divergence, as any image of the sword. The cutting through of wisdom, of perception, creates a sense that there are forms, but that they are at play and at motion in a matrix, in a field, which in and of itself does not present a thing, is not an object, is not capable of being labeled or adequately named. And this brings us to perhaps the finest statement, the perception of the unnameable. And that comes from a Chinese sage, which we all know, Lao Tzu, who lived about 600 BC. And in the beginning, the very first chapter of the Tao Te Ching, he makes a statement in sort of paralleling couplets. That's the finest statement that I know of. For us, there are over 50 translations of the Tao Te Ching in English. It's a very easy, almost rule of thumb way of focusing on this problem of the form and the formless, the yin and the yang, the situation that obtains when insight is operative, when the sense of presence is kept in mind, and we look at things, all of a sudden we have this interplay of forms and a mystery. This is how Lao Tzu expressed it in translation. This incidentally is a translation by Edward Urquhart. It was contained in a book published in Switzerland about 30 years ago. Just to refresh. The Tao that can be discussed is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be named is not the eternal name. The nameless is the beginning of heaven and earth. The name is the mother of all things. Always without desires, thereby one beholds its secret. Always having desires, thereby one sees its return. These two are of the same origin, but different in name. Together, they are called the Dark One. The one still darker than the dark one, the gate of every mystery. Now, there's a convenient way in which this has been expressed in a symbol, which we all know, and that's this wonderful symbolic device called the Tai Chi, Supreme Ultimate. And this, of course, is well known. All of us have seen it, most of us for many years of our lives. This is quite an unusual device. In fact, one of my favorite illustrations of the magic of the Tai Chi was in an illustration that a student of mine did one time of 4 old Chinese sages, three Chinese sages, simply sitting under a tree in the mountains, staring at the Tai Chi. This contemplation of that, this meditation upon that, is inexhaustible. It's a phenomenon that as we get more and more used to it, we begin to see emerge a new tone to the quality of the feeling, the sense of presence inside it. It begins to have almost like, say, the flaming edges around the Dharma chakra when we understand that that emotion with it so that it seems not to be emotion. That is to say, this symbol, the contemplation of this symbol, gives us a sense of increasing intelligence about our sense of presence. So that it's not simply always a diffuse awareness or an undifferentiated universal experience, or simply an incident of cosmic consciousness, as American scholars about 90 years ago. It becomes more and more intelligible. That as we begin to understand and be able to express and increase patterns of images which finally emerge into what we would call a language, and we begin to make sense to each other intelligently about the qualities which are symbolized here, brought together and integrated here. Two examples of ways in which this does not work. One, and many conceptions think of the Tai Chi or of the phenomenon symbolized by the Tai Chi as a simple polarity, a polarizing, a positive and negative, a yes and a no, the light and the dark. This sense of blind polarity like this is simply a loggerhead. In fact, in Tibetan imagery, the Gyalpo, the foolish devil, is always painted exactly one half black and one half white. This is the image of a foolish parallel to real wisdom. It produces nothing but a loggerhead tension all the way through, although one can develop a sense of regard for it and come out with great philosophies based on it. It is the kind of stupidity that a computer without a human being would come up with as wisdom. And all of that, everything derived from this understanding of polarity, is truly illusion. It has no basis whatsoever in any reality. A second, closer one, is a phenomenon that can be symbolized somewhat like this. Let's label this. This is a mechanical distribution of energy. The same thing said for this blind polarity applied here, although it's more difficult to see, because this seems to have a sense of interplay. It seems to have the kind of interchange that we would think that we've been talking about all the time. But the fact is that this mechanical distribution of energy also leads to the same blind illusion of this kind of polarity. This problem was very famous in Greek thought about 2 generations before Plato. And it produced the kind of conundrum, and conundrum is a philosophic word for a tension which cannot be resolved. On the Homeric days, on the back of Odysseus and his understanding of wisdom personified in the scene. But before the Parthenon was built, before they understood what they had, a philosopher named Parmenides, in the city of Alea, came up with a pithy statement which stymied the Greek mind for about a generation. He said, what is, and what isn't. And that's a damnable thing to try to wrangle with in your mind, to try to spin out in terms of the iconography of the human life is almost impossible.
And it produces, almost by mirror paralleling, a reaction so that one goes completely over to the other side and thinks that is so completely wrong, so completely devastatingly a dead end, that the exact opposite must be true. That what is not must be what is, and what is must be what is not. One gets a topsy-turvy kind of world. Plato, working on the basis of a great insight made by Pythagoras, and Pythagorean insight, I think, could be illustrated by use of 10 dots, famous in antiquity, and Tractus. Pythagoras realized that the imagery that is expressed as number has a relational reality that is true all the time, anywhere, and yet is not in and of itself an object or a thing. For instance, the idea of 2/3. Where is that? The idea that something could be 3/4. There is no particular object that is a 2/3 or a 3/4. And yet the concept, the relational concept, coming out of the basic symbolism of the Tetractys becomes something fascinating. It gives us confidence that somehow, in things that are not objectively there, the key to what is in fact objectively there resides. And that by getting away from blind polarity and going into relational, metaphysical perceptions of the world, we come a little closer to a resolution, or at least to a solution that may allow resolution. This phenomenon took place about the same time that Lao Tzu was writing the Tao Te Ching in China, and about the same time that the Tai Chi was being focused on as a possible resolution for the Chinese style of the quandary, which Parmenides have enunciated so well. Plato wrestled with this idea from his early days until the end of his life. And in Plato, I'd like to point out to you two places, two dialogues, in which he made steps which are still accessible for us in our daily experience to apprehend. The first one was in a dialogue that's usually written off as one of the minor dialogues of Plato, and it's called the Charmides. Charmides. Parmenides was a handsome lad. He was a dashing swashbuckler, beautiful body, beautiful smile, charming, graceful movements, and 25 years after Plato's dialogue was set, he was on the council of 30, the tyrant who almost tore Athens apart. Part of the irony of Plato is that he always shows us what the true nature of people really is. But Charmides, in that dialogue, the concept that Plato is trying to bring out, and the form is simply Socrates and a few friends talking, Socrates questioning this handsome, dashing lad, trying to find out what it is that sets him apart, that makes him tick so well. The Greek word And Sophrosyne is kind of an inner balance, a kind of a self-knowledge that's very peculiar. It's full of irony. Because as Socrates elicits, both from Charmides and from his sophistic teacher, Ripheus, who was there, and several others, he finds out that none of them, including Socrates himself, can say just what it is. Because it is very peculiar knowledge, it is a knowledge of its own self. And as long as a human being is thinking in terms of these kinds of loggerhead schemata, a knowledge that is a knowledge of itself is a conundrum. There's no way to resolve it. It is forever a problem. It is, as Krishnamurti wrote in one of his books, an impossible question. It is always going to be impossible, and it will be impossible until the paper is thrown away, on which it is written. It is not resolvable, because it does not come to focus in the horizon of meaning which this expresses, nor this. And this horizon of meaning, in the sense that finally we can approach that knowledge of knowledge. And it has a very peculiar bent. It is practical. That is, it translates into daily life. It isn't just some abstract phenomenon. It is very practical. Because in Sophrosyne is also the implication of something which one does. The old Greek phrase was doing one's own. Doing your own thing. But knowing that you're doing it and actually doing it. And not setting your self-consciousness aside from doing it. And that together was Sophrosyne. Which is what Charmides, the young man, exhibited, but couldn't say what it was. And of course, if it remains naive, that kind of an energy, priceless though it is, veers off, atrophies, decays, becomes something, as we know from the Book of Changes, quite distinctly different from what it was. Second dialogue that I'd like to mention to you by Plato, dealing with this issue, called the Sophy. And usually, in universities, American universities in particular, you can take 1,000 credits of philosophy and they will never read the Sophy. They never tell you that the Sophy is worth reading because it has a part at the end of the dialogue, about 12, 15 pages, in which Plato finally says that the world of forms is peculiar because forms have an interchangeable, basic nature, and that only by taking the whole realm of forms and their context together can we know any one of them. And he lets it go with that. And he says that a sophist is the kind of a philosopher who will never know that. And so he's confident that his scheme or his map of things is the scheme or the map or the right way, or at least a major portion of it, whereas the real philosopher, a real evolution knows that what he's able to entertain is forever only a part of really what there is. And it's never going to be any other way. And so that one carries around with oneself, we would call a sense of humility. And I think Plato would say, it's just knowing that 99% of what there is all the time. We just don't know. But this has stopped us from being. And this is a peculiar thing, because if we come to apply this, and we're talking about the form of being, of that quality of presence, that here we are, and over here. We can sense even on a very deep perceptive level that we have being. Well, does that mean then that this exists against some realm of not being, some realm of nothing whatsoever? This is the problem. And this is the problem that possibly two resolutions offered to us in human experience are worth noting. One is the I Ching, the Chinese Book of Changes. The other is a great work of Buddhist poetry by Shantideva called the Bodhikaryavachara. Shantideva lived about the 8th century AD. He was a Buddhist monk in the Madhyamika tradition. That is, descended in thought from Nagarjuna, who had lived about 500 years roughly before him. And Nagarjuna had entertained one of the great perceptions of which human beings really are capable of. That was the Sanskrit word for it was shunyata, the void, the nothingness, that fantastic non-thing of non-being that, yes, in fact, let's call it shunyata. Let's use that word. Let's say that the not there is there. Let's just do it for convenience. Shantideva, 500 years later, that wonderful perception carried from the Bodhikaryavachara the notion that once the awakening of the desire for enlightenment, once the bodhisattva is awakened in a sentient being, and that little light, that little fire, that little spark of prajna, if you like, carried in one's being, in one's presence, in one's daily life, can be guarded and nurtured and brought into full flow. And all that possible within this fantastic, difficult realm of balancing and interchanging poetical perception. Let me try and punctuate this with a poem, another poem by Wallace Stevens, and then I want to show a few slides, and then we'll say some more things in chain. This is, I'm skipping over such poems as The Connoisseur of Chaos and other poems to save us. This is a poem called, and there are three together, like three stanzas together, called The Poems of Our Climate. It comes right after two poems, one called Loneliness in Jersey City, and Poetry is a Destructive Force. It's very interesting and visual. Three short stanzas that link together to become a poem called The Poems of Our Climate. clear water in a brilliant bowl, pink and white carnations. The light in the room more like a snowy air, reflecting snow, a newly fallen snow. At the end of winter, when afternoons return. Pink and white carnations. One desires so much more than that. The day itself is simplified. A bowl of white, cold, a cold porcelain, low and round, with nothing more than the carnations there. Say, even that this complete simplicity stripped one of all one's torments, concealed the evilly compounded vital I, and made it fresh in a world of white, a world of clear water, brilliant edge. Still, one would want more. One would need more than a world of white and snowy scenes. There would still remain that never-resting mind, so that what one would want to escape, come back to what one had been so long composed. The imperfect is our paradise. Note that in this bitterness delight. Since the imperfect is so hot in us, lies, flawed words, stubborn sounds. The imperfect world. We're at home. You needn't bother. I'd like to break this up at this time and show some slides and illustrate visually some of the things I've been talking about, also to introduce a couple of corollary things. Bobby, just how about a small break first? You want a small break? Get juices flowing. One thing that should be brought in is, and we'll see it here at the very bottom of the slide, are the bagua, the 8 trigrams. This has happened to me for 20 years. The bagua are the 8 basic trigrams, and they are derivable from this, much in the way in which, given derivable, much in the same way that geometric axioms are derived from simple notions like point, line, and chord. From very, very few axioms in geometry, we can derive an enormous number of geometric axioms from which we may construct a realm of ideas. And the same true for the Taoists. And in fact, the Taoists in China were responsible for a great many innovations in what we today would style as science and technology. It's simply that we know now that their genius was truncated by invasions and wars, that even at one time, in about the 8th century, a certain Taoist thinker had come up with a version of the differential calculus. But he had no way to apply it, and I used it as a mind game. All that was truncated, of course, by devastating wars and the entire development of the scientific mind in China was put in limbo. But the fact for us to note is that we simply don't rest, are not content to rest with some primordial, mysterious statement, but we wish to extend it. We wish it to become intelligible for us, both to express things with a sense of camaraderie with kindred people, also to make it intelligible to ourselves. Just briefly, a couple of notes about the Bagua. These trigrams make up the hexagrams of the I Ching, as you must all know. And that the change, the patterns of change in the Bagua, is that on this side, on the creative side, as we delegate value to it, the unbroken line is the yang because we delegate that value to it. It could be the other way around. The yang line at the bottom of this trigram rises. And as it rises in the form, it occupies the second space, then the third space, and then finally the fullness of that form of motion, Chen, the totally created trigram. The same is true on this side with the yin, or the broken line. It rises. We're dealing with the book of changes. What we're looking at are relational things at changes. And the changing relational aspects of the unbroken line gives us this progression up to this. This trigram here and this trigram here are these phenomena here. That is that fire and water con, the additional fire, lead, the clinging, are the points of interchange in the Taoist system. This kind of sophistication is just not available for casual discourse. At one time, for instance, the stylization of energy patterns was somewhat similar to this kind of mechanical distribution. And in fact, in the commentary, the Ta Chuan, the great treatise in the I Ching, you will find a map very similar to this, the Yellow River map, in which the 1, you count the 2, and the 3, these are given directions, forms, and these symbolic elements eventually separate out and form the 8 trigrams around the center. This is just to give you an indication that things were not immediately perceptible like this, in this kind of sophistication. They had to go through a lot of imaginations, and there are ways to spell these things out. The Tao is not simply something which one says is there, isn't it mysterious? There are many, many things, huge tomes of statements that can be made about it if we wish to. And yet, none of those tomes can get in the way of just carrying a sense of it with us. Even if you're in a supermarket pushing your cart, you can still have that sense of presence that there's an interchangeability going on in a context that in and of itself is nothing at all. Now, a few slides to introduce a couple of other things, and also to give us a sense of imagery. I always like to keep our sense of imagery as close to a language as possible. This, of course, is old food sheet. He lived about 5,000 years ago. Notice the tortoise down below. When they were excavating at Anyang in the 20s and 30s, they found mounds and mounds of burnt, cracked tortoise shells, indicating that the early style of divination by the I Ching had been going on for many, many hundreds of years. This is the great stupa at Sanchi, and is more an image in keeping with the style of mind of Shakti Diva and the Bodhikara. Just to show you a graphic image, somewhat different from Uchi. And here's a slide upside down. This is a slide of Sarnath, where the Buddha gave his first sermon. And this is much the way it looks today. This slide, I think, was made about 1975, 74, 75, around there. Just to provide some images for you, I don't want to elaborate too much. This is a drawing of a little hut, and the form in the center at the top is a frond of a plant. And we here in Los Angeles can recognize it somewhat. It's a banana plant. And this is a Sunni drawing of Basho's hut. And Basho took his name from the banana plant. The banana plant is the Basho, and it tears easily in the wind. It waves around. It's not very strong, and yet it survives because it has subtleness to it, and it's able to endure. And the Sunni style, again, you can see the interpenetration of form and formlessness. This is the place of residence of the great Matsuo Basho. Lived about 300 years ago. And he was responsible for one of the most delightful documents in the Tao of Journey. He wrote a small book, a travel journal, called the Oko no Hosomechi, or the Narrow Road to the Deep North. And in this travelogue, Basho, coming about 2,500 years after Lao Tzu, gave us a mixture of prose, which is a certain kind of formal presentation, and poetry of a very specific kind. In fact, he invented it, called the haiku. And what the haiku does is it cautions us to stop our ordinary mind, our ordinary continuity of forming, and to pause, and in that pause to see through a transparent frame of reference to the formless. And Basho invented the haiku in a very peculiar way. The haiku is a 17-syllable bit of language which gives one image, but not to give the image, but to allow something to go through that image. It used to be that poets in Japan, like your predecessors in China, and we hope that it will gain fame in the United States, used to sit around and drink and write poems together. They would write one poem, and the haiku would be the first idea or image, and then everybody in round-robin style would add an image until they had linked verse, or a renga, as they used to call it, and that would be the poem. And the poem would be what all of us put together around this central form, which allowed us to see through it into the realm of, as the Chinese would style it, nothing whatsoever. And in that sense, our companionship was a companionship of the infinite. We were companions for all time and everywhere. And just because it might be 1632 or 1795 or 1980 makes no difference whatsoever. It's because this was the third planet in this particular star system, or the fourth planet in some other star system, made no difference. But beyond time and space, we had shared a companionship that transcended time and space. And that initial signal, that symbol of that capacity, that we can do that anytime we choose, together or by ourselves, was the haiku. Basho
whose lineage was from a family of samurai soldiers who, by the 1600s, the pistol put the samurai out of business. It didn't matter how fast you were with the sword, any punk with a gun could shoot you down before you could even see it. So the samurai, by Basho's time, had already given up flashing their swords, but Basho and true samurai used language like a masterful samurai. All he would see was just the glint of the hint of an image, and not the thing itself. And that's what haiku does. And the narrow road to the deep north was, of course, presented many times and illustrated. These illustrations are by the great haiku poet Busan, who followed Basho by a couple of generations. And you can see here the typical use of the sumi style of line, but also Busan's wonderful handling of shades and volumes. And the subject matter is interesting, and the way in which it is presented, that is, its line quality, is interesting. And both those interests reside in the same perception. Another page from that, also by Busan. Wonderful Matsuo Basho. I could not find my copy of the Oko no Hosamichi to bring, but one of the haiku, extremely famous in there, was the one where Basho is walking with his companion Sora, and they get to a resting place, and he gives us the image that the sound of the cicada penetrates the granite stone before him. Another one, they're walking through an ancient battlefield, and in the very tall, grassy, weedy rubble, you see the helmet of an old warrior who had perished some hundreds of years before, and a blade of grass is growing through the eyepiece of the helmet. Little things like that, and this universe really loves little things like that. Just those little things. In contrast with Busan's lovely light handling, this is one of the kinds of places that Basho would have visited. These are the pillars at Horuji, and same principles at work. The lines are going a little thicker, a little more formality. The object is the same. We give you a place in which the interchangeability of form and formlessness, attention to detail is given. Just a series of slides now, just to round out something for Basho. An approach of these steps. These are steps going up to the temple gate. This is one of the little side gardens in this temple. And this is one of the little places where water drips in one drop at a time to flow in its ripples over the side. We can use any scale whatsoever. We can use huge pillars of architecture. We can use little squiggly, simi lines. We can use great philosophies of Plato or Nietzsche, or we can just carry a sense of presence with ourselves, any place, any time. The effect is the same. The intelligence is the same, and it's just a question of proportion. Another example, this is a painting by Ma Yuan, one of the greatest of the Sung landscape painters. He was often styled one-corner Ma because of his use of piling everything in one corner. The Tai Chi is here almost graphically in the midst of the yang forming on the lower right is that poet philosopher and whose self a little bit of the nothing resides, and out there in the nothing, what he's seeing in the midst of that voided mist, single solitary bird on the way. One's reminded a little bit of Lipo's famous phrase in the poem, very Taoist. He said, "I'm like a certain bird who flying south so long and tired, and I think I'll fly north." Complete, effortless interchange of form. This is, backwards. This is a slide from Seshu's Long Scroll. I thought to bring the entire long scroll on slide, but again, apologies, I could not locate my set. This again, very much like the Mind. About 500 years later in time, from the vantage of where we are in a certain gestaltic form, we always have a view towards the infinite. And it's always accessible to us. And while we can enjoy maneuvering around in what is, we should try to keep in mind what is not. Because in that interchange and penetration is the full view. And this is just an image to give us a rest. Final Taoist painting on the grove of trees, much like you might find any place in the Sierra Nevada, at about 8,000 or 9,000 feet altitude. These pines look like the scruffy kind of trees that get up towards the tree line. Now some images from another realm, entirely, and yet paralleling almost exactly. These are images from the Blackfoot Indian Reservation that I obtained from the tribe in Canada. One of the great ways in which we mark out the ordering of intelligence is to keep track of the year, to know where we are in terms of motions of shared time, even though we can know that we are just designating these values, we could designate other ones. Let's agree that the year is a certain periodic duration, and that within that there are certain forms which we would like to observe, commemorate, to mark out our intelligence and to celebrate the fact that we have done it, and we share it, and we can communicate it, pass it on, cherish it, write a poem about it if need be. One of the great ways in which our kind, that is humankind, have always marked out the year is to celebrate the solstices and the equinoxes. That is, the positions of our planet vis-a-vis our star, as being the two most primordial celestial elements available to us. I know it comes as kind of a shock if you've never entertained the idea, especially to those astrologers who like to think of Venus and Jupiter being very powerful, and the moon and so forth. But this very planet itself and the star itself and their positions are the most primordial relationship. And so solstices and equinoxes of common interest to man throughout the ages, and especially the solstices, either the winter or the summer. For these people, I feel very kin to. The summer solstice was the great moment. It was the time at which the day, of course, was the longest, the night the shortest. That didn't bother them. They were not afraid of the night. They did not differentiate out good and evil in terms of night and day. That wasn't the point at all. The point was that the sun, quite visibly, the most influential form that they could designate, and that it had a real relationship with the earth. And so that the summer solstice, and in fact today is the summer solstice for this year, was a great day of celebration for these people. And the celebration was not limited to the Blackfoot people. In fact, all the Algonquin-speaking tribes utilized the summer solstice for what they called the sun dance. In fact, all the Plains Indians across this whole continent shared that celebration. It was the great day of the year. It's the great symbolic ceremony of their ritual cycle. And this was true all the way down through the Hopi reservations and even further than that. Part of the commitment of doing a sun dance was to vow to do that sometime in the wintertime. When things were cold or tough, sometime in early February would be just about right. In fact, I was asked to do this lecture about February 2nd when I was asked, it occurred to me, since the day was going to be at the solstice, that this was a kind of a form of sun dance. And that I am almost glad the fact that I have a terrible cold and have been feeling bad, because part of the sun dance is to endure suffering, not to shirk it, to stay in contact with it closely, intimately, and work with it and interchange with it so as to transform. And that was really important to remember, so important that all these people, I think you can see in their faces, these were fine people. I know a lot of these people, and they are fine people. There's nothing primitive about these people at all. And if you've got a few days to sit and wait, you can hear things that you never thought you would hear from human beings. You never thought that Lao Tzu could have written that 3,000 years ago, or Homer, and somebody's telling you that over a couple of people. It's really amazing, and like Basho says, the sound of the cicada penetrates those rocks, and you don't ever forget it. In the Sundance, for these people, it was an 8-day ceremony. The first 4 days were just moving the camp again and again. You'd set up camp on one day, then you'd move it the next, then you'd move it the next, and then on the 4th day, you'd finally come to the site. Well, it wasn't that we couldn't find the right site. It was that this is the way things are done. Not just by force, but that man approaches the sublime, not by leaping in all the time, but sometimes by taking his time, like taming a wild horse, or like getting a hold of that Vajrayana energy. You get to it with a little humility. And on the 5th day, these people, like all the Plains Indian people, and the best rendition that I know of it in writing is Black Elk in his book, The Sacred Pipe, is a version of the Sundance in here. What they would do on the 5th day is they would build the Sundance Lodge. And for that, you needed 28 poles around the outside, but you needed one center pole, which was a whole tree on the inside. And usually in this part of the world, they would use a kind of an aspen, a poplar tree, we used to call it in the Midwest, for 2 reasons, as Black Elk says. One is that if you cut a cross-section of that tree in a certain way, you get a 5-pointed star in the pith of that tree. Just as if the Great Spirit had put the imprint and the secret right in the center of the thing itself, and that if you knew how to cut through and get a cross-section of reality. There it was, to confirm the fact that yes, indeed, not only that it was there, but also that you learned how to cut through it just right to see that it was there for yourself. And you could tell your children or your grandchildren to go and do likewise, and they could do it for themselves. That the order, the patterning, is right there. And the second reason is that that style of tree has a kind of a leaf that shimmers in the wind. This is just a visual shimmering, but it's a sound. And it's the sound of almost like a ceremonial rattling. And our humankind have always loved to dance, and we've always loved to put on the bangles and the sparkles and the fringes, and in our moments of great joy and ecstasy, to shake those things. And that tree does that in the wind, and especially in the summer. Sometimes a grove of poplars. I've meditated under a grove of poplars and have thought that I was on a jet plane. It's just an apprehension of space that you just could hardly believe possible. So the tree that these people usually chose was one of these poplars. It would be fetched by the men of the camp, and usually only those men who had proven themselves in courage, either in battle, as in ancient times, or in living. It takes a lot of courage to live sometimes in this world. But those men who had proved themselves in courage would go out and get that tree, and there was a whole ritual about obtaining that tree. And they would sit around it and sing songs to that tree and select it out, because it was the world tree for them at that moment when they selected it. And they made sure that it never touched the ground until it was brought into camp in great ceremony. And then, after the women, and especially the holy woman, had anointed that tree and made it sacred, was it raised as the center pole of the Sundance Lodge. And in raising that tree, the prayers of the people, in certain symbolical ways, sometimes it was colors like red or blue to signify the primordial elements of the universe, or sometimes later on when somebody had a sick relative and they would write a prayer to the Holy Spirit, Kawaka and Taka, it would be put on parchment and tied to all the cosmic prayers, because the individual is always fitted in with the cosmic. Never left out. It's never out of place. And all that would be raised, and the center pole would be there. And in the succeeding days, each day a sweat lodge of 100 willows would be built. Brand new every day. 100 willow saplings interwoven, and skins put over. And in one of the teepees, the holy woman who had made the vow to sponsor, to give this Sundance in the wintertime, February, she'd be fasting all this time. And in this 100 willow sweat lodge, the men who would be participating in this ceremony would purify themselves every day by steam. In that part of the world, as in Finland or other areas, a steam bath every day is a way of healthful living as well as purifying. But there's the element then, steam is sort of like fire and water together, using both those elements together. One thing that the Holy Woman would do in her fasting is, with other people, would cut the tongues of buffaloes that had been collected through the hunting season in the spring. They might use 200 or 300 tongues of buffalo, dried buffalo tongues, the voice of the buffalo, and cut those into strips, which she would pass out during the high point of that ceremony to everybody in the tribe. Everybody participated. Everybody got to share the tongues from the Holy Woman. And that was their linking in to this great ceremony. And then some young male in the tribe who would in connection with the holy woman on the last day of the ceremony would link himself by rawhide thongs to the top of that sun pole, and on the other end he would be skewered. The flesh of the shoulders would actually be pulled out a little bit, little skewers put in, and he was given an eagle bone whistle to hold in his mouth, and this was the only exclamation of sound allowed to him. And these thongs were always cut in spirals, because they knew about the form of the double helix before Watson and Crick made it clear. And these two spirals lay up to the same central point on the Sundance pole. And this young man would bear out the fact that the holy woman's vow to consecrate the tribe again to the Holy Spirit was in fact possible all the time because some young people in the tribe were willing to also sacrifice and endure suffering, endure that contact of suffering. And in this case, to dance around that pole until he had pulled himself free, had gotten himself born again out of that suffering, and was capable of standing free. I Ching says, heaven suspends its emblems. A man sometimes has to feel that he can be suspended in the universe absolutely without any ties whatsoever. I remember that time when Edward White was doing the first EVA from that space shop, and his temptation was to unbuckle that umbilical cord. And I thought, isn't that interesting? It's like it's in our genes. But once free and independent and floating, just like heaven suspending its prize emblem, the man returns home again, because he knows things have to go on. There's others that have to grow up, and we have to continue ourselves. And so the sun dancer would go to the center pole and sit down on a mat of sage and have his dream about having done this. And the holy woman, having passed out the food, and the tribe, having witnessed this, was refreshed and renewed. And their sense of the interpenetration of form was verified. And their homecoming is verified. And their sense of the sublime and the presence of the Spirit within themselves verified. Now, I have a series of images about the Sundance, so I'll just show them to you, and then we'll close with one other poem. This is the Sundance pole. Prayers up there at the top. These are not in any particular order. This is a game, the sidelight of the ceremony, and hand game. Just how many sticks in which hand form of gambling. Here are women being fixed up. One of the societies. There are all sorts of societies within the tribe. There might be 12, 15 people. One of the great societies for the Blackfoot is called the Horn Society. And men who have proven themselves over many, many years are allowed into the Horn Society. And they dance with great curved poles that look like croziers of ancient Egypt. Quite interesting. Is someone being made up? Everything you see has a symbolic nature and should be explicated at length. It's a procession. The Holy Woman is the one, and the third one from the front. No, there's you. This is a view of the last Blackfoot Sundance ceremony. The last one was given in 1961. There will never be another one for the Blackfeet. The National Museum in Ottawa took all the implements and put them in glass cases because these primitive people needed to be remembered. And the best way to remember them, of course, was to freeze their symbols in glass cases so they could be seen by familiars. And here's the man in 1961. This is the man with the eagle bow whistle pointing away. This is not an easy thing to do, as you might imagine. And this man here, very tough, sympathetic hombre, would from time to time come and grab the shoulders of this man and shake him, not only to let him know if he were in some kind of a delirium, that they were all still there with him, but also to keep that sense of tautness. Forms are effective if the lines are taut. When they have the shapes that they should have, and they are usable for us. A few more images. There is the lodge being made. Of course, the great circle of teepees around. Here's all the accoutrements in one of the women's tents. Family life, incidentally, and all these fine, timeless ceremonies always went on around them. There were always babies to change, and kids to feed, and people had to go to the bathroom. Right in the midst of sacrificing and preparing for the sacred daily life going on. Always has, always will. Making up some poles. Just some visions. And two more slides and then and here's a ladder going up to fix it, the center pole. And we'll stop there. I'd like to read a closing poem. Try and bring this together. This was a poem that was written in 1960, written in the Sierra Nevada Mountains. And I had originally wanted to juxtapose against the Blackfoot Sundance some of the music of Alan Kovanes, who writes he's an American composer who has died a couple of years ago. But I have a series of albums up here. He's written about 250 pieces. Here's the Odysseus Symphony. Here's something on the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, set to music and so forth. What I had wanted to play in connection with this was Kovanes' Meditation on Orpheus, which is a very special handling of music. Not just this piece, but Kovanes' whole style. It's a music without crescendo, without coda, without any of the normal form that music has had since the time of the Gregorian, well, just past the Gregorian age, from Bach on, say Bach through von Weir. There have been certain musical forms which everyone understands and knows. Kovanes, at the end of the Second World War, burned all of his music, realized that he had finally understood what sound and silence were, and wrote 250 or so compositions, utilizing this new old intelligence. And in his music itself, we can hear, played for ourselves, a sense of feeling, very much like the poems of Stevens, very much like the using of the I Ching, very much, I hope, like what I've been able to present somewhat to you today. But the music is there. All these things are there. They're all accessible for you. You can go and get it anytime you want. Let me close with this poem written about 20 years ago in the Sierras, apropos of midsummer. And this was a hike I made when I was 19, and it was a very difficult thing at the time. I had been an asthmatic child. It was the first time I had ever hiked above 12,000 feet. First time I'd ever been above tree line in my life, and I thought I was going to die. And yet I kept going, and it was an amazing experience that when you come to the end of your physical capacity, you're still in. Unbelievable. And you hardly know what to say. Except that later on, if you're 19, you write words like this. Behold your shadow on the rocks, shadowy motion up toward the summit, detached sensation up. Behold your own form moving, form from the sun's limits, moving upon the mountain, converging upon the peak, driving on, stubborn, make this journey. On altar's pyramid crest, an old thunder looks his best and knows it well enough and recognizes the pause, the falter and the fall behind him now on the upper slopes, the failing of physics played out to emptiness, the wilderness, hollowness, this hallowed wildness, the tether of human strength, taught. Make this count. Thank you very much.